Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Light Dark Academy. My name is Giuseppe Improta and in today's episode we are start lighting 3D. So in this episode I want to do two things based on the requests that I got from the Understanding Exposure videos that I published some time ago. The first thing, I'm gonna pick up the scene that I left in that video and compare the 18% gray sphere with other kind of materials, other kind of values, so that you can really understand why we are setting the exposure on this gray value. And the second thing is opening a scene that I have extracted from a commercial that I had to do some time ago, very quickly, in not even a week of time, and showing you how to actually expose your scene based on your composition needs. So without further ado, let's get into Maya and see how things work. Alright, we are into Maya. Let me load the scene that I've prepared, which is this one. And we are back to our very nice sphere with this ground plane and this light. Now, if I start Arnold's viewer, first of all, I have to say something. I found out that basically you have the exposure value here in the pixel viewer right next to the luminosity. I did not notice it the first time because like they are on the same line, which is a little bit, I don't know, like confusing, but it is there, which is really helpful. Now, if I go on my brighter part of the image, which is on the sphere, I can see that this is 0.18, which is corresponding to an exposure value of 0.0. I am averaging 10 pixels here. Maybe it's a bit too much as an average for such an area, but it's fine for the purpose of this example. So you can see that the exposure values are about 0 and we are at 0.18. So pretty good exposure right there on a photographic base. Now I have in this scene some other spheres that I have prepared, like this one, which is pink. Let me hide the mid-gray. And without changing the light, this sphere is already exposed correctly. You can see that now our exposure value says 2. Because as we said in the other Understanding Exposure videos, a good skin value is about in the zone 7, which is 5 plus 2, so 5 where the mid-gray is, plus 2 for compensating for the skin brightness, and we are in zone 7. Exposing for that 0.18% value gives us a very good starting point with our scenes, no matter what is the color of the asset that we are doing the lighting for. I do have another couple of spheres here. I have this white one, and you can see that the value here is 0.98, 0.98, 0.98, which means that my exposure is on point, because if I check the material on this sphere, this sphere is actually not white, but is exactly 0.98. So this means that our light has been calibrated to have a good range between the mid-grade and the white. And again, I can hide this white and show the black sphere, and you can see that now our color is about 0.04, which is exactly what this black value is, 0.039, so pretty close. And what this means is nothing else than our light, based on its size and its power, as an exposure that allows us to have the good range between black, white, and obviously the mid-gray. And our mid-gray is a good point to actually set up all our scenes. So now you understand that you can potentially set up all the lighting of your scene this way in black and white without worrying about colors at all, if not later. And once you have the asset ready, so somebody else has painted the texture, if you're not working on it yourself, and has done the material and the look tab, and you bring it in the scene, it should just work. So your values, whatever the color is, will be still exposed correctly. Obviously this implies that the look dev has been done according to the same photographic principles and not by eye, where there is a Macbeth chart and the exposure of the Macbeth chart matches the photographic references and all this kind of stuff that we will see more in detail when we start doing look dev as well. But for now you have to understand that setting up your lights so that your 0.18 sphere is 0.18 is a perfectly valid way of lighting a shot. So as you can see, all the theory that we discussed about finds a very practical application once we get actually into the 3D side of things. Alright, now I want to show you something. When I click on this light, I have this parameter here, which is called Normalize, which takes care of adjusting the light intensity according to the size of the light. So whatever way I scale this light, it tries to counterbalance and takes the intensity of the light at the same value. And you can see it because if I make the light smaller, the shadows change because the light is smaller, so it creates a sharper shadows, but the exposure is more or less the same. You can see that it's a little bit brighter for the same reason because the shading is slightly different, but it's not a big difference, it's not a big change. So you can still keep your light at the same exposure and just change the shadows this way. It's a little bit like when you in real life put a modifier in front of a light. You are not changing the size of the light itself, but you are changing the way the light scatters across the surface that you are exposing to. And when you have this normalized parameter off, for example like this, now you see that the spheres is brighter, and if you did not have a key point, a reference point to balance the scenes against, you wouldn't know how to set the exposure for this size of the light. So my 0.18 value is really my comparative term to make sure that the light and the values are correctly exposed, are correctly in range. So no matter what size the light is, I always make sure that then I scale and I change the intensity so that I can always balance the exposure according to a photographic principle. And then this allows me to match visual effects shot quickly or even make a composition quicker, because you always have in your mind how the grayscale work and how things will look like if you expose for your mid-gray, and when you have a skin or a character of something, you know that that exposure will still count, you will not have anything blown away, the highlights will be still good. But if you don't do that, you will always go by eye and you will not have any real reference term, and that's not the right way of doing things, because then you end up having shots that are not consistent and you have to adjust lights in every shot, and when you have a production of many shots, that cannot be done or it's gonna be a nightmare. Alright, so now let me open another scene that is a little bit more complex and comes from a commercial that I worked on a few weeks ago. I want to use this scene to actually show you how to start lighting a scene based on these exposure principles. So I have extracted this scene here, basically removing all the materials and everything and only leaving the lights. I'm gonna just render this right now and showing you what happens to the scene. So here you can see the actual scene is, this is not the very final lighting, but anyways, it's good to give you an idea of what's happening here. And you can see like I have a bunch of AOVs here. If you don't know what they are, don't worry, we will discuss about that. And you can see that basically my exposure value here, even if the brightest one is basically -1 on this mouse here, minus 1.5, and is -2. So I am slightly underexposed in this particular scene because basically this commercial had these lamp bulbs. You can see the light spilling through, but the bulb was transparent in the original scene, so the light was actually spreading around, and that was the brightest point of my image. So as we said, exposure is also a creative process, not just a mere make sure that everything is in the range process. So in this case, like you have the light spilling through because the bulbs are not transparent anymore, are gray. So maybe I should have left them transparent, but anyway, it doesn't matter. This is to give you an idea of what the current lighting is in the scene, but how do we start lighting for an 18% gray? So what I'm gonna do is hiding all these lights here that we have and start the Arnold render, which will be basically black, Let me reduce a little bit the resolution of preview resolution because we don't really did that much. I'm gonna temporarily move this one away. So I've hidden all the lights. Let me create an area light here, or not area light. Let me push it all the way where it needs to be. Make it bigger. And that should do. Let me start the rendering and let's see what happens. Let me also increase the exposure to 5, for example, like this. Alright, so let me now render this. Let me expose up. There we go. Let me show you here the preview. I'm not really used to work with one monitor, so I'm gonna place this one here for now, and this one here. And you can see that now I have my light, but obviously everything in the back is dark. But what counts for me now as a first thing that I want to do is understanding which part of this image is the one that I want my eyes to go first, right away when I open the scene. It could be the director of orchestra here, or it could be somebody that is in the background, right? It could be a place right here, for example. So it all depends on the creative process, all depends on what you want the viewer to see first. What is important is that you define this point in your image that is your key point for your exposure, and everything will follow. Usually your exposure point is the one that is the brightest in the image, unless you have a very bright window in the background or you have a backlit situation, but in general that's where you want all the attention of the viewer to. So that's the place that you want to focus. So let's say that I want the focus of, and always this is always relative to the camera, right? So I have a few different cameras in this. Some of these have the director of orchestra viewer visible, some don't. So you also have to take into account the shot itself, obviously the camera, the viewing angle, otherwise it's useless what you're doing. So you can see I have a bunch of angles. Let's take this one, for example, for this camera, and let me reset the exposure. So now we said that since this material that I've applied as a 0.18% gray, I have to make sure that what I have on my material here is 0.18 gray. I should remove these AOVs because they might be confusing for you. Let me do just that. Under setup, AOVs. And let me remove all this stuff. Close. This. Repeat. Boom. Now they're gone. And so let me check now. My exposure value is minus 1.6 there and 0.05. So we are always obviously very far from what we need. So now I have to check the values until basically I reach my target point. Let's try 12, so half of the light. This gives us a good result, 0.21 on a 0.2 exposure value. Now you don't have to be too anal about the values that you are setting, because this is also a visual thing, right? You will see how the contrast balances once you add more and more lights. But in general, it's a good starting point. So I would say that as a starting point, an exposure value of 0.2 and an RGB value of 0.21 is okay. Then I can go more into finessing it, and I can see 0.18, here we go, and 0 exposure value. So with the exposure of 11.5 on these sides of the light at this distance gives us the correct exposure for the director of orchestra. So now, the other thing you need to do now is understanding the relation between this subject and the other subject or the other elements of the scene. So let me just duplicate this light and move it in the back here. Actually, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna rotate this light so that it comes from the top, and I'm gonna make it fairly big, like this. Now, even though I duplicated this light and I moved it back and that's the same value as the original light, the distance of the light from the mice and the shading of the light itself, and with shading I mean the shadowing that the light is creating, are different. So I need to go there and change the values. Now, the way I change these values are not really referring to any mid-gray anymore, because they only refer to our eyes. The only point that refers to the mid-gray is the one that we want our exposure set to, and we just did. So in this case I can put a 16 here, and you can see that now what we have done is inverting the brightest part of the image. So this is if we wanted, for example, to have the background mice exposed as a main subject, but then we would have to set the exposure on those ones and not on the director of orchestra. So in this case this is wrong, for me at least, and I can go 13, so expose the light a little bit up, but still keeping the key values on the mouse in the front and having a little bit of light on the ones in the back. So these ones are exposure values minus 1.7, minus 2, which is okay, I believe. And we can go a little bit higher. So you know that if you are at minus 2, you can double the exposure of the light. So you can double the intensity of the light, which means increasing one stop, and you will get in the next zone. So here now we have minus 1, basically from minus 2. So that's why understanding the exposure and the zones is so important, because this gives you a very quick way of referring between things in your scene. So now basically I have my scene lit. I'm just gonna make it very simple because I just want you to understand how to start setting up the exposure, and this is what is gonna count. For me now the background is obviously too much as bright as the foreground, and so I'm gonna take this one down. 13.5 maybe, yeah, that works. And now you can see that the light is still stronger in the front than the background, and the eye perceives the mouse in the foreground right away before everything else, because it's our brightest point. So I think this clarifies a little bit how to set up the exposure in a 3D scene on a grayscale model, so in just using values. And then whatever color you put in here is just gonna work, as we have seen in the previous scene. So it doesn't matter what color the boxes are under the mice, or the racket in the background, or the plug, plastic plug thingy there, or the ears of the mouse. Everything is exposed photographically correct, so you don't have to worry about applying color to this scene and then losing contrast, because the values you have already defined them in grayscale according to the photographic zones. So this should just work. Alright, so I think that's it for these videos. It was longer than I wanted it to be, but I just want to make sure that you start with the right foot. It's really important that you set up your scenes the right way before getting into more complex stuff like texturing and the colors. That it's only add confusion if you are not clear on how to set up the basics, the foundations of your scene. If you find these videos helpful, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell next to the subscribe button to get all the notification of the new videos, and leave a comments below. If you have questions, feel free to comment on these videos. I need you guys to interact a little bit and tell me what you want to see, what you need to know, and everything that I can be helpful for. So that said, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.